I'll hand it over to Gary now. And
thank you.
Yep.
And as we go through tonight, please ask questions when you think about them. Don't wait till later, because I guarantee you, wait till later, you will have forgotten them. So please ask, and I'll either answer it immediately or defer it to some time later. But at least there will be two of us that will remember. But before we start tonight, I want to give you a couple of thoughts. Are we as photographic judges putting boundaries and limitations on your creativity? And are you as artists and photographers not only accepting those boundaries, but reinforcing them by only providing images that judges like? And has the pursuit of competition awards superseded the pursuit of artistic creativity? I believe as a photographic community, we have forgotten Picasso's words to learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist. And I'll give you a couple of examples, a couple of very, very quick examples. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, up to about the Second World War, there was a movement. It was the first global movement in photography. It was called pictorialism. And pictorialists would blur their images. Now you've heard judges, oh, we want sharp images. A lot of landscape judges want sharp images from foreground to background, which is not natural. We don't see the natural world in that manner. But they want the sharpness. These pictorialists would deliberately blur their images. Now, as one of their members, you may have heard of him, Alfred Stieglitz, said that we see everything through atmosphere. The atmosphere blurs and softens lines, but it also adds mystery, mood, and depth to an image. Another one of their members, you may have heard of him too, Henri Cartier-Bresson, of the decisive moment fame. He also said that sharpness is a bourgeois concept. So when you look at some of today's photographers, here's a couple of photographers. They're both American. Rocky Schenck, I think he was born in the 1960s, and Joyce Tennyson. You can see they deliberately blur their images, but I don't know them personally. I do know Len Metcalf personally, and he will tell you that he does not put images in because judges don't like the soft exposure that he gets. You've heard of judges also talking about, oh, must have a straight, level horizon. I had one moronic judge one night say, oh, you need to straighten your horizon. Hang on, the image was taken up in the high country, and if I'd straightened the horizon, the fire tower would have had a 15-degree lean. So how would the judge handle photographers like Gary Winogrand, who would deliberately, as you can see, he's deliberately tilted his horizons. In the top one, it's implying that the person here is leaning in to the other person that's giving him some money, or the danger for the cyclist leaning out into the traffic. It's an artistic design. So I believe that we need to think about it as a photographic community. And I think we often forget Anton words, that photography is more than a medium for factual communication of ideas. It is a creative art. And I believe we're losing that creative art. So tonight's tutorial, that was just a starter, just to get you thinking, get your creative juices flowing. Tonight's about still life. Along with macro, monochrome, and abstract, still life makes the big four of the most misunderstood genres in photography. Closely followed, I may add, by landscape, but it's one of the big four. People don't understand it. Now, normally I'd say, go to the internet, have a look, get some ideas. But you go to the internet, you do a search on still life images, and you get these. And none of these, by the way, are still life. So what is still life? How do we tell? Well, okay, maybe we need to go to definitions. Now, firstly, in my experience, definitions are generally poorly considered, poorly researched, poorly written, and poorly read. And I'm yet to see really good definitions. But let's have a look at one. Here's one. Now, no one's going to read that. It's verbose. So it's poorly written one to start with. But if you look at it, it says there are two types of still life photography found and created. I have seen judges that are not aware of anything but created still life. But interestingly enough, you look at that definition, then you go and read the rest of it. That section in blue only talks about found still life. So it's a very poorly written definition. Here's the definition from Warragul National. It's not bad. It says a photograph of a deliberate arrangement of inanimate objects, whether natural or man-made, or a combination of both in an artificial setting. Composites and not allowed. What's wrong with it? Anyone?
Doesn't include found.
Doesn't it? Well, no, it doesn't, because it talks about in an artificial setting, so it's only talking about created still life. What else is wrong with it? Poorly written.
Deliberate arrangement.
Well, if it is in an artificial setting, then it has to be a deliberate arrangement. And you've got this tautology here, or a combination of both. But a lot of competition definitions do this. This last sentence here, composites are not acceptable. If they are not going to be policed, don't put them in there. In here, I was on the judging panel for the Warragul National Still Life last year. At no stage did we, as the judges, ever see the metadata. And I will tell you now, if I do a composite, you won't know that it's a composite unless you look at the metadata. Now, as judges, we don't see that. Why put it in there? It's a load of rubbish. But it's not a bad definition. So why did we get these type of images? Now, neither of those are still life, unless that hand there is separated from the cadaver. Then you could maybe say, yeah, but I'd like to see the red end. Okay.
But Gary, you saying the one on the right, bunch of flowers.
This one?
Right, without the hand.
Would be okay.
Would be okay.
Would be acceptable without the hand. Yes. This one obviously is a planter in a pot. Okay. Here's one from a camera club. I won't name the camera club because it's such a terrible definition. A non-natural arrangement of inanimate objects in a composition in which they are supportive and compatible with each other. What the hell does that mean? But as hard as definitions are to read, as photographers, you must read them because the sting is in the tail in this one. The composition may include flowers, but only as an accessory to the original. Hang on. What do they mean by the original? I think what they mean is that the flowers are only as an accessory to the main focal point or subject. So why did we get images like this? Whilst this and this are still life, this is not. It goes against the definition. So as bad as definitions might be, you should read them in whatever competition you're getting into. So definitions are not particularly hard to write. It takes a bit of skill, and I do run courses on how to write definitions. There's my definition. Boom, let's go home. Let's have a cup of tea and we'll go home. That's it. An arrangement of inanimate objects in an artificial or natural setting. Boom, that's it. You don't need anything more. That says the lot. Okay? However, people do seem to have a problem with inanimate. What the hell does inanimate mean?
In the dictionary.
Go to the dictionary. But you look at the dictionary and it's pretty vague and so it says not animate. Okay, so let's look at animate. That's a bit better. We've got a few things: give life to, make alive, lively, etc., etc. But what is really still life?
Something that's not living.
Something that's not living, yes. But let's go to the history. And I hear you. I too took up photography because I couldn't draw. But we need to understand from a photograph, from a painter's point of view. And as photographers, we should be looking at painting for our knowledge. After all, painters have been plying their craft for tens of thousands of years, where we as photographers haven't yet made 200. That occurs next year. We haven't made 200 yet. Painters have given us all of our aesthetic knowledge, all of our compositional knowledge, most of our colour theory, colour psychology, colour physiology, and much, much more. We should use that knowledge. We should look to painters to give us that knowledge. In fact, I was up at Albury Wodonga just a week ago. I was coming back through the storms that we had. And there was an old guy, he was in his 80s, been painting for 50 odd years. As I said to the Warragul people, get him in to give you a talk on how he does his painting. Because we had some marvellous discussions on how you go about doing your painting, looking at your colours, doing your composition and all that sort of thing. Now, at this point in time, and I should have mentioned it earlier, I had a sad experience about a week ago. I was in the audience like you at a still life tutorial for one of the clubs that I belong to. I belong to a couple. And it was a sad experience. It was a sad experience because the people who organised it went to just so much effort. They brought in a truckload of things to use for photography. Everything from fancy chairs to ballet shoes to old cameras. They even went to the trouble of baking a cake and baking cookies to do the food photography. Then they stood up and talked for a couple of minutes about why they took up still life photography through the pandemic and the fact that they enjoyed Ewan Bell's food photography course and all that sort of thing. And all this effort they put into it. And at the end of the night, I went around quietly and spoke to a number of people and said, okay, can you define what a still life is? No. Do you know how to put a still life together? No. Can you talk to me about other forms of still life? No. So while the photographers had fun going around photographing these dozen different stands that these people set up, the photographers actually learned nothing about it. So we should learn from our painting brethren. So looking at the history, if we go back and we look at, we're going way back here to cavemen days. The bottom one, I've included that, it's not a still life, but it's there to show you that cavemen understood proportion, perspective, and scale. The top one, again, is not a still life, but I thought that is a brilliant one because this cave person not only understood that to give depth to an image, we have layering, we also have shadows. We often talk in photography terms about chasing the light. We should be chasing the shadows as much as we're chasing the light. And this caveman understood that shadow creates depth in an image, something that many photographers today do not understand. And yet he understood this tens of thousands of years ago. But if we come forward a few thousand years to around the Egyptian times, the Egyptians loved their art, but their art was all about storytelling. What happened between the kings and queens and the people who ruled the society. Or it was to do with the dead. What did the dead require in the afterlife? Food, furniture, chariots, weapons, and that sort of thing. Notice here the two-dimensionality of the images. All of them are very, very, very two-dimensional. Now, if we jump forward quite a few thousand years, we find this particular image. It was uncovered in Herculaneum and was dated to 50 AD. Here, for the first time, we see art not as a storytelling idea, but as something for pleasure. And that's an important concept, for pleasure. Notice also the three-dimensionality, particularly around the peaches. Hasn't got quite the three-dimensionality of the jar, but he's got the three-dimensionality of the peaches. Something Paul Cézanne would be working on almost 2,000 years later. Okay. Now, however, man is about to enter a period of time in his history of darkness, of fear, of very intense religious beliefs. Scientific progress, usually called heretics, if you went in that. Art now no longer is for pleasure. It is for storytelling. Notice in this image, it is also very, very two-dimensional. It is not three-dimensional. So again, we've regressed as artists to look at images only from a storytelling point of view and a religious point of view. The only generation of advancements was things like stained glass windows in churches, because the congregation was generally illiterate and therefore it was to represent stories from the Bible. So did art, yes, please.
What do you define two-dimensional? Because I think that it shows the scalpus and infinity, leading lines down to the back.
It does. You do have leading lines, but when you look at the people here, you look at this person here, it doesn't give you the impression of three-dimensionality, unlike the peach here. That gives you an impression that this is a 3D type object, where this one, you look at this guy here, he only looks two-dimensional. You're right here, there's these leading lines leading back here, but this one's leading out this way, this one's leading across here, so they're not going into perspective to create that 3D dimensionality. Does that make sense? Okay, so art for pleasure's sake did survive, but it survived in the borders of illustrated manuscripts. And that's where art stayed for quite a few hundred years. So let's jump now forward to around the 1600s. This is a time of great expansion in human history. It's a time when Britain, Portugal, Spain, France, and the Netherlands were expanding out across the world. And people started to get interested in nature. And we saw the creation of encyclopedias and the interest in natural history. And we see, again, this period of time, art now being created for pleasure, not just storytelling. Now, this is not a still life, because right there you've got a butterfly. Although I suppose after 400 years, the butterfly's probably shed. But it would not be classed as a still life. Now, at around about this time in human history, with the rise of the Flemish and Dutch masters, we finally see a word that's crept into the European language, still even. Translated from the Dutch, it means still life. And it was used in representation of these type of images. We also see at about the same time another word from France, which I think describes it better, and that is nature mort, which means dead life. So I think that's the best description. But also around about this time, we see a rise of another type of image. A lot of people call it a still life image, but it's not necessarily. Like a lot of things in art, it has grey areas, and that is a thing called vanitas. Vanitas is a type of image that's all about the iconography. So here, look at the left one. We see death represented. Now, this vanitas type Art looks at life and death and the transience of life. So here we've got the skull that is representing death. The pleasures of life by food, beauty of nature, reading and writing. One thing that always creates it as a vanitas is you've got the transient. So here we have a chronograph and we have a candle burning, indicating the passage of time. On the right-hand one, again, we've got death represented by the skull. You've got the manner of death represented by the sword. The pleasures of life by the wine and the wine vine and the goblet. Smoking, which was considered a pleasure in those days. Books, music, and the beauty of nature are all within there. And what have we got? We've got a burning candle. Again, showing that transience of life. Here's another one. And this is where I say not all vanitas are still life. This is not a still life. Why? Because, yes, we've got our iconic death represented by the skull, but we have life and the pleasure of creativity and painting. The artist is painting themselves in the reflection. So you've got to be very, very careful with still life that you don't see the reflection. But again, we've got the pleasure of music, the pleasure of wine, writing. We've even got the means of death in the kosh. But again, you've got the transients shown by the chronograph. Now, it's very, very, very difficult to find images that are vanitas but don't have a human skull in them. Here's one I did find. And again, you've got your burning candle, you've got your hourglass, you've got food, writing, and so on. You've got exploration, which is supposedly exciting and a pleasure to live through. And of course, you've got the death in here. So that's vanitas. And a lot of people are not aware of this. Around this time, we see that we're getting, again, there's this idea of art for pleasure. Now, you'll find that most of the major master painters tried their hand at still life. And I recommend still life to every photographer. Why? Because you can set up a still life creation. You can leave it there for months. You can have total control over the lighting, the camera. You will learn so much about photography. And you can literally set up something and leave it there for a year if you want and experiment with it. And this is what a lot of the great master painters did. So you've got Cézanne, you've got Van Gogh, who was famous for many other types of images. You've got Matisse, Gauguin, who was famous for his Tahitian women. Even Picasso and Georges Braque, who are the creators of Cubism, did their thing with still life. So why is there this confusion? We've had this history for a long, long time, but there's so much confusion. And I think the confusion comes about from a number of points. We have, and this is an excerpt from a tutorial I saw given by a person I normally respect. And if you look at the first bit here, it says an arrangement of inanimate objects. 100% agree. The objects can be man-made or natural. 100% agree. I think the next one's a bit of a throwaway line. Yeah, it can be anywhere. Beauty. The last one, the objects must be obviously arranged, etc., etc. No, they don't have to be obviously arranged. So we have these confused ideas. You go to the internet and you'll see splash photography rated as still life. It is not. It is only still because you've had high-speed photography. You see this sort of thing. Now, these are obviously falling. You've got the splash here frozen. So if this is classed as still life, why is this one not still life? And I don't think there's anyone in the room or any judge that would say this is still life. But if the others are, then this has to be. And if this is not, the others are not. Okay. We see confused ideas. Building photography. Hang on, we call that architecture. But here, the building might be right? It's an inanimate object, but those clouds are moving. So again, unless you only had, if you cropped it through here, yes, it could then be a still life. Okay, it would meet all the criteria. But we get even more confused ideas. Fine art, still life. Now hang on. I do a lot in definitions and that sort of thing. And what is the definition? Can anyone give me a definition of fine art? Huh? I did see one. If you pre-visualize the image, then it is a fine art. Duh. Okay, so this is obviously not a still life. Neither is this. And yet you'll see this in various websites and that sort of thing. This one, yeah, I can say that's a still life. I will agree with this one. This one, yeah, it's a bit iffy, but yes, you could agree that is a still life. That one, no, unless it's a cadaver, and I don't know how many people have access to get cadavers in this room, then it can't be a still life. This one, yeah, you've got to be careful, but yes, I can see areas that it could be. But I love the next one. A landscape still life, really? But you will find this on the internet. That's why I say going on the internet can be very, very confusing. So what types of still life do we have? We have a constructed or a created still life. You can see this one is certainly created, and excuse me, I had I've known quite a number of judges that think this is the only form of still life. Here's another created one. Only form of still life, but we're going to have a found object. Now, obviously, if the leaves were on grass, then it's not still life. But leaves on a pavement or something like that, or as they've said in that definition earlier, if it's a dumpster or a whole range of things, it could then be created as a still life. Product, yes, definitely a still life. Food. Now, food you've got to be careful of, because food photography, as in the image you're seeing there, is a still life. But with food photography, you can have someone's hand pouring honey onto a cake or pouring something. That is food photography, but it is not a still life. Okay, everyone happy with that distinction? Tabletop, yeah, I'm a bit iffy on tabletop, but it could be floor, could be anywhere. But generally, that's a form of still life. Don't forget your abstract. And you can do some amazing still lifes with folding of different coloured papers and all this sort of thing. And of course, don't forget your macros. There's many, many objects we can use as macros still life. So I'd like to give you some inspiration here, looking at some of the old photographers. Well, some of them are not so old. This one is Edward Weston, very famous for his fruit and vegetable series. Also, he did a lot with nudes as well, very famous for that. He was originally, remember I spoke earlier about pictorialisms. In his early days, he was a pictorialist. He then, when the F64 Club, which constituted about 12 photographers such as Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham and others, he then converted to what you could call straight photography. Olive Cotton, an Australian female photographer. Brilliant. Look at what she's using here. This one over here, a simple glass, a sheet of paper, and the shadows. You don't need fancy stuff. This is really dramatic stuff. You look at these teacups here, and the important bit is the shadow, not the cups. It's the shadow. Here, Paul Otterbridge is simply using simple geometric shapes to create still life. Irving Penn, more famous for his fashion photography and portraiture, especially his portraiture around Queen Elizabeth II. So very famous. But I love this concept here, taking frozen things, freezing them, and then photographing them. This, I think, is absolutely amazing. Simple nails. Look at this one. This one here. You can see the nail getting aggressive. Isn't it brilliant? I'm going to do a series of these myself. I reckon that's a brilliant set of images.
Gary,
Yep.
you're right about the nail on the right hand side being more of a dictator by looking down
Yep.
down below.
Very much so. And you can see the stool that he is supposedly sitting on being pushed back, so he's getting upset about the game. So it's really telling a story. Same with the left-hand one. So these are really, really, really good images. But here's another one. Both of these are still life. They could also be abstract. But they are still life. They're a found still life. And if you want to look closer to home, go to Peter Dombrowskis and look at a lot of his images. This kind of image. Now, we can either have a bit of a break time because I think we're getting, up to this point, I've talked to you about what a still life is. So unlike the people on the other tutorial, you now know what a still life is. You've got some idea, maybe some inspirations. We're getting now into probably the more important bit from your point of view. How do you create a still life? Continue or?
We've actually got 11 people on Zoom as well, Gary, so.
Yeah, oh, look, I'm
I
happy
think
to
it would be-
continue.
it would be good if we can
Continue?
just continue.
Okay, no problems. Okay.
Otherwise it gets a bit
Yep, no, that's
disjointing for
fine.
them.
Yep,
Okay,
cool.
Thanks.
Okay. Yep. I think we had a question. No? Okay. Camera technique. This is a very important second.
I do have a question
Yes, go.
there. So when you say macro.
Yep.
You do fungi, but that's still there.
That's growing. The fungi is growing.
So it's still classified
As
still life.
no, it's not classified as still life. But you can have macro. You can have macro that you photograph insects. You can have macro flowers. You can have macro just about anything. Think about if you go and get an old typewriter and you photograph a couple of the keys in there. That would be a macro, but it's also a still life. Okay, so, as I said, a lot of the art bleeds into other formats. For instance, the abstract with the paper, creating the folds. It's still life, but it's also abstract. The ones that you saw before with the tree trunks is abstract, but it's also still life. So it's these grey area ones that are not what you can I use the term mainstream. I don't particularly like the idea of mainstream, but it is one way to describe it. So if you're photographing fungi, that is not still life because the fungi is growing.
So
And-
the tree.
It's- Yes, so it's a tree. You could be right there and you could argue that case with that one, yes. Yeah. And look, before someone comes up, some plants and that, when it's cut off, will grow roots. So are they dead? Really? But generally speaking, cut flowers are considered to be dead. Okay. So camera technique. Go that Anton Adams great for his quotes. You don't take a photograph, you make it. Very, very important. And making a photograph implies process. Here is a process. I'm not saying you've got to use that process. It's a process. It's my process. I would like to draw your attention to the first one there. What is the purpose? So 1.3, what is the purpose of the image? It's important to ask at the conceptual stage of your photography. Now, for instance, you might say, oh, I'm going to make this into a photo book. Okay, so if I'm doing that, I will need a hero image, but I also need some supporting images for that hero image. That makes sense? Good. Look down here at 4, at your post-processing period, and you notice at 4.2. what is the purpose of the image? We asked that question a second time. And why do we do this? Because at this point, you're starting to edit the image. Now, if I say this image is going to be in a competition, yes, is it digital or is it print? Because you will edit the images totally differently. Now, a lot of people are not aware of that. If you have an image, if it's going to be in a digital, it's edited differently than if it's in a print. But you also need to understand that back here. Because we often talk about in photographic terms, oh, you need to fill the frame with your subject. But I'll show you why that's a problem in a minute. Understand your camera and your camera lens is a tool. And all tools have both strengths and weaknesses. Okay? So, can you tell me, what type of lens do you use?
35 to 70.
35 to 70. Can you tell me the sweet spot at your 35 millimeter?
8.
What about at your,
Eight.
what about at your longer area?
Sorry,
At your longer zoom area?
longer zoom.
Yeah, where is it?
16.
That'd be your maximum, not your sweet spot. Okay? I know, I'm sorry, I'm being unfair. I've thrown a question at you. But a lot of people don't know their sweet spots. Now I've got a dozen lenses and I can tell you, I can pull my lens out here and I'll tell you the sweet spot. I've tested all my lenses. I know exactly. And if you've got a zoom lens, the sweet spot will be different at your minimum zoom to your maximum zoom. Okay? What is your best ISO setting on your camera? Okay? You need to know this because I will tell you now, I've got a camera in there, an Olympus. Who's got an Olympus? No one. Yeah, Nigel has. I know you have. Here's a website for you to go and look at. Photons to Photos, it's called. Photons to Photos. It is a very technical website, but on there you will find that things like the Olympus camera, you don't shoot it on an ISO 400 because that's much noisier than ISO 800. Yes, and a lot of cameras, particularly modern day cameras, are like that. You'll see the noise ratio go like this. Have a look at it. So you need to know your tools, your strengths and weaknesses of your tool. Photography is also all about compromise. Every decision you make in photography is a compromise. You alter the shutter speed, you will need to alter either the aperture, which can affect your depth of field, or your ISO to get this image back into balance. Or you might need to add light to this scene. Every decision you make in photography is a compromise. First thing I want to mention is the field of view. Here's an image. Oh, by the way, I should mention your field of view, unlike what manufacturers and retailers say, is all about the lens. It is not about the sensor size. I believe manufacturers and retailers should be headed up for false advertising. Here's an image that shows you the various focal lengths here compared to the human vision. Okay. As you extend the focal length, your field of view gets narrower and narrower and narrower. You will see images kind of like this, but instead of having 24, 28, and so on, your focal lengths, it will have, oh, the outer image here is what you get for full frame, and small rectangle is what you get for crop sensor. That's a lie. And I've seen this both on manufacturers' websites, Canon, and I'm a Canon shooter, has it on there, oh, with a 4K video, you get this, but 8K video, you get this. Bullshit. It's all, and look, I've done this myself. I set up my own cameras, full frame, and I've got a crop sensor and I've got a 4/3. when I put the crop sensor on with the same lens as the full frame, yes, it gave me a smaller field of view. But when I put a 13mm lens on it, in other words, when I allowed for the crop sensor, I got exactly the same view. No difference. It is all about the lens. And here's a table that represents your field of view, depending upon whether your camera is a crop sensor or a micro four thirds. Another one with the lens, and I highly recommend this for, in fact, on one of your outings, you want to set this up.
Yeah.
This, and when I was going through university, we actually had to do this. You take an image that's sort of roughly the same image. You can see these are all roughly the same perspective. They're not perfect. You can see there's a bit more shoulder here than there is here, but they're pretty close. But notice the distortion you get with the 24, 35 and 70mm lens. It's getting closer to normal. And we found that 85mm lens gave you the best portrait. But of course, a lot of portrait photographers are using the longer lenses so that you can get further away, you get full body shots and that sort of thing. That's why they use the longer lenses. And you can see the longer lenses are giving a much better image without the distortion that you're getting at 24mm. Now, for still life, this is vitally important because if you have a 24mm lens on still life, your objects may be distorted. Now, that might be what you want, but it's something you need to consider.
Gary?
Yep.
Just before we proceed, one of the things is, I've got a 50mm lens.
Yep. Great lens. What sort?
Sigma.
Great lens. Class is one of the best, the sharpest lenses in the world. I've got one too.
And that's classified as almost equivalent to the eye vision. Is that right?
There is discussion on that, but it's a simplistic discussion. When you go, if you went back to that image looking at the human vision, only part of our vision is 3D. And then you've got 2D parts, and part of our peripheral vision we can't see from our, so on the right hand side I can't see from my left because my nose gets in the road. It is approximate that it's I think research shows that it's more closer to 47, 48, thereabouts. It's not perfectly 50, but yes, they regard that as equivalent to human vision. But human vision, when you look at the field of view, what is it, about 70 degrees this way, I think. It is the field of view of our central cone, because I know my 50mm, I can see from here, I can see my hand there, all around to about here. I'm looking at you.
But that's blurred.
It is blurred. So what they're looking at is our central cone. We have two parts of our vision. We have the central cone, which is, they talk about being equivalent to a 52 megapixel camera, which is a load of crap, but they talk about that. And then they talk about the peripheral vision deteriorating as it goes wider. And that 50mm is sort of our central cone vision. Okay. On our lenses, we have some dimensions on the front of the lens. You have a look on the lens. And this is regarded as the minimum focus or focusing distance. What does it mean? Where do I measure from? Anyone?
From the focal point.
From the focal point, yeah, to where? Centre? Anyone with that on any other areas of the centre?
You've got the foreground and background.
Yeah, but if I'm going from my subject, where do I measure to? On the camera.
Depends on your camera. Most cameras have markings on that show you where the pointing.
Yep. You've got two areas a lot of people are not aware of. You've got your working distance, which goes from the front of the lens to the subject. Your minimum focus distance goes from your subject to your sensor plane. Now you can see on the Nikon here, you've got a sensor mark. On ships, we would call it a pencil mark. It's a circle with a line through it. On Canons, it tends to be on the mirror hump. On Olympus cameras, it's buried down between your eye viewfinder and some of the controls, but it will be there somewhere, and that's what it looks like, a circle with a line through it, and that's the center of your sensor, and that's where your focal point is measured from. Okay. Now, usually, who cares? But remembering in still life, we're getting much, much smaller distances. So it becomes much, much more important. Now, this one is your most important one. Depth of field. Be aware that a lot of things affect your depth of field. Your sensor size. The smaller the sensor, the bigger the depth of field. So a crop sensor or a 4/3 camera will have a much, much bigger depth of field than a full frame camera, which will have a bigger depth of field than a medium format camera, and so on. Sensor size does play a role. Camera to subject distance and subject to background distance also is very, very vital. But your major control for your depth of field is your aperture. And this is vitally important. So here's an example. If we have a full frame camera set at f9 and a 50mm lens, and my subject distance is 30 meters, I will have a depth of field going from just over 7 meters to infinity. You don't need to use f20 and f22 and all this sort of thing to get infinite distance. So there's your depth of field. Now, interestingly enough, I'm doing a tutorial on sports photography for another club in a month's time, I think. Being sports photographers, they want to know, what's depth of field for a 500mm lens? Using the same thing, the depth of field for 500mm lens at 30 meters is a depth of field of 2 meters. Okay. Big difference in lens choice. But if we take this camera, same setup, f9, 50mm lens, but instead we're only going to be 1 meter away from our subject. From this huge depth of field, we now go down to 200mm by simply bringing the subject much closer, and often you will be closer than 1 meter.
So what you're saying is the focal distance
Has a huge difference on it. But if I drop this now from f9 to f4, I go from 200mm down to 90. So your subject distance and your aperture have a huge effect on your depth of field. And that's something that we need to understand as photographers, because depth of field is vital, particularly in still life. Here's some examples. You look at this one here. You can see the glass here is beautifully in focus. The one in the front and the ones in the back are not, implying depth to our image. You look at this one. This is obviously in focus, where the clock is not. Because of the scale, the clock is now appearing in front of the flask and the books. You look at the tomatoes up here. These 2 tomatoes are sharp, the rest are not. That's implying depth. Remembering, as photographers, we're only taking 2-dimensional images. We have to create that 3-dimensionality in images. This is something, and it goes to what Gail and I were talking about before. I will show you my bias. But if you're using a semi or full auto, be aware that most photographers, and I've said time and time again in camera clubs, are focusing on the subject. They don't notice the camera settings. Now, the tutorial I mentioned the other night, I was wandering around and this woman was photographing, what was she photographing? She was photographing a violin on a bed of autumnal leaves. And it was with a with a camera, and she's holding it like this. Okay, bad position. It's not a stable position. So you need to look at that stable position. Then she took the photograph, and I said to her, "That's not going to be sharp." "Oh, it looked okay." I said, "Bring it up again." She brought it up again. "Oh, it looks okay." "Yeah, on a tiny little screen, it might look okay." I said, "Now zoom in." She zoomed in. "Oh, that is not sharp." "No, it's not." Why wasn't it sharp? She was on aperture priority and hadn't noticed that the camera had set a shutter speed of 1/4 of a second. I don't care who you are, you're not going to hold the camera steady at 1/4 of a second. So this is something you've got to look out for. And I'm not saying don't use semi-automatic or that sort of thing. That's up to each individual. But you need to be very, very, very careful if you're going to use that to watch your camera settings, because it tricks out photographers time and time and time and time again. So here's my bias. Yeah, manual exposure, particularly for still life on a tripod. Shutter speed, doesn't matter. If you have it at a 30-second shutter speed, who cares? It's on a tripod. I'd be suggesting you're looking at a starting aperture of around f9, f13, somewhere thereabouts to get a nice depth of field. And as low an ISO as you can. If your camera will only go down to 100, fine. If it goes down to 50, great. Anyone seen the latest camera by Fuji? No, Sony. The A9. Global shutter speed of 1/80,000th of a second. But it has a minimum ISO of 250 ISO. Okay, so, and personally, if you're on a tripod, I tend to use manual focus. Again, this is my bias. If you're going to use handheld, again, I'd suggest manual focus, which is what I got this woman onto. And she took the first thing, okay, it was black. Up, changed the aperture, changed the ISO, and she then got a pin sharp image. Again, consider your depth of field and use your aperture to provide that. Shutter speed, I've suggested there 1/100th of a second to there, whatever you can handhold steady at. Now, if you're holding your camera out here, you need to sort of have a stance where you've got a triangular shape of your legs, elbows in here, holding this. Better still up to your eye is much, much more stable. So whatever you can handhold that.
Sorry, Gary, to interrupt you again.
Yep.
You got F9 to F13. Is that because of the sweet spot you related to?
Not necessarily. I'm just putting that as a rough guide to look at your depth of field. If it's F8 and you're getting an adequate depth of field, then F8 would be acceptable, or that whatever you want to choose for your depth of field. And as I said, an ISO high enough to allow for that shutter speed. And I would suggest spot focus, because that spot focus will allow you to focus on the exact spot you want, and you can start using hyperfocal distance.
Is that,
Yeah, go on.
Is that using a tripod as well?
No, that's handheld. You can see the.
No, but I mean the spot focusing.
Oh, I tend to use manual focus, and I will then put my square where I want to focus and that sort of thing. But again, this is just a guide.
Yeah, using a tripod, I would suggest that the stuff that I've done, manual focus is 100% essential.
Yeah, it's to me, it's as I said, that's my bias. Okay. Composition. Okay, composition. We often talk about composition. We often talk about impact, and I was talking to Nigel on the way down. We often talk about impact. Can anyone tell me what impact is? Can you define impact?
A wow factor.
A wow factor is just another way of saying impact.
Yeah.
Making the image pop.
When you collide it with the car, that's an impact too.
That's right. Exactly right. So you've got these problems when we're talking about composition. And I've seen many judges that talk about aesthetics. Oh, I don't judge anything else but aesthetics. But hang on, photography is a combination of the artistic and the scientific. And so within aesthetics, and aesthetics is a huge field, and I'm talking a huge field. There are many researchers around the world. We've got a couple of very good researchers in aesthetics. And just to give you a bit of a mouth watering for aesthetics, are you aware there's two types of aesthetics? Actually, there's more, but two general types. There's evolutionary aesthetics, and you see this in kids in playgrounds. A kid will have a bent out ear or a crooked nose. They're not symmetrical, they're not one of us, they get help. We went through that as kids as well. And then you've got developmental aesthetics, which is much, if you understand art, you then have developmental aesthetics because you will choose something different to someone who chooses via evolutionary aesthetics. But again, here's just some of the basics. So you've got in composition, you've got leading lines, you've got your basic rule of thirds, you've got a basic compositional rule of Fibonacci. These are basic stuff, not advanced, it's basic. Then art elements here, you've got design concepts. And if you're going into design concepts, you'll go a bit further and look at Gestalt theories and all this sort of thing. And of course, you've got your technical, if your shutter speed, your aperture, how you stand, what you're doing, and all this sort of thing. These are important concepts to use. I'm not going to go through them tonight because that's beyond this course. But leading lines, you're used to leading lines. Here's an image, it's got leading lines. Yeah, we can see the road going down there. We've got a leading line of the fence. We've got a leading line of this hill in here. It's not a great photo, but it's got these leading lines. We can see this, you're used to this. Where are the leading lines here?
Corn husk,
You got a corn husk, yeah.
grapevine at
Grapes
the
and-
back,
This one here, coming down here, yeah.
and at the side,
This one here,
No,
the other side, grapes on the other side.
this one here, going up here,
And at the back, coming in from back,
that,
yeah.
yeah. But there's nothing leading up to our focal point, is there?
I think they're circular and I think it's a narrative that you just go round. Your eye takes
Okay.
on a story around the photograph.
In actual fact, you've got, does anyone know how we read an image?
depends which culture from left to right or right to left.
Yes.
Up and down.
So Western cultures read from left to right, Arabic cultures and so on will read from right to left. So we read left to right. We also have a diagonal here called the Baroque diagonal and a diagonal here called the sinister diagonal or the descending and ascending diagonals. But here's the other bit. Every person on the planet reads an image from bottom to top, foreground to background. That's the way we see nature. Okay. So in here, look at these here. We've got something here. We've got a bit. Notice the light on the grapes. We have a thing that's called value. We often use that, or luminosity. You can see the grapes are a bit brighter here. They're a bit brighter here. Now, I'm going to introduce you to something that is very advanced. I'm not going to delve deep into it. Just going to skim the surface. And it's a thing called notan. N-O-T-A-N. It's a Japanese word, and it stands for light-dark harmony. And you can create notan diagrams. Here is a notan diagram, a two-colored notan diagram. You can see we've got a spot here corresponding to the peach. We've got these ones here. You look at the grapes here, we've got a light here with another bit on the bowl. And then we jump up into the peaches and the grapes here. Notice here, we've also got a bright spot. That's the same luminescent value as our subjects on the flower. Now the flower has a stalk coming down to another bright spot. You can hardly see it on the strawberry, can you? But it's there. The system tells me it's there. Your eye will tell you it's there. And then, of course, we come back with the corn, and hey, presto, we jump in, and this is the way we're going around through here. You might, if you're contrary, you might say, well, I'm going around that one. Doesn't matter, your eye is still taken by that luminescence value. It's not something we can easily see at times. Now, that's a 2-colour notan. Here's a 3-colour notan. Tells you a little bit more information. Again, you can see the luminosity values through here. You can see a very bright spot. But you look at where our focal point is just that little bit brighter than the rest of the bit that's taking your eye around that image. If anyone wants to know how to do notan diagrams, please send me an email and I will show you how to do that. But it's done in Photoshop. If you don't use Photoshop, it's much more difficult. Okay, so you look at an image like this. You can see here our eyes caught by the cookies. You can see here we've got implied lines in the melon, but you notice the melon, this area here is brighter than the other parts of the melon. This melon here is much darker, so it's implying this depth. Of course, we go up in through here and notice the cherries. The stalks of the cherries are placed to draw our eye down to the cherries. And then, of course, we come across into the strawberries, and these 2 strawberries are not there by happenstance. They're deliberately put there to lead our eye across here. Notice the tablecloth down here is much, much darker. So our eye is not going to come out of the image down here. It's going to stay in the bright part of the tablecloth and go back through here. So our eye is being led through what's called an arabesque through the image. Does that make sense? Okay. Moving on. Rule of odds. I think everyone's probably heard of rule of odds. And in these 4 images, we certainly display the rule of odds. You go here, hang on, where's the rule of odds? You look at the top one, we've got 4 objects, haven't we? But this is where Gestalt theory comes in. Gestalt theory tells us that visually, our mind will separate the similar objects from the dissimilar object. So in the top one, we've got 3 lenses and 1 camera body. Our mind sees that, and that's what we're looking at. So that's also obeying the rule of odds. This one down here, there's only 2 pairs. Yeah, the shadow, because the shadow is so strong, it becomes part of that object as well. Make sense? This one over here is an interesting one. When we talk about colour theory, we look at cool colours being receding and warm colours being advancing. Here you have the orange, this and this as being the 3 advancing colours. That's your focal point. The rest is background, it's going to the back. So even this one, you can say, well, there's 1 orange, but there's also 3 warm coloured objects. Make sense? Okay. Said earlier that you will edit print images differently to digital images. And here is only one of the reasons. It's a composition ratio. Now you look at a full frame or a crop sensor camera, we're talking about a 3:2 ratio or 1.5 to 1 ratio. And that's what the crop sensors are. Interestingly enough, the only paper that is your 1.5 to 1 is your 6x4 or your 15x10 paper. You use an A4 or an A3, and it's a totally different ratio. When you go digital, your 4/3 camera is a different ratio again, as you can see. And digital, your most common one, is this one here, 1920x1080. It's a 16:9 ratio. Totally different. If you go into the UK salon, they want 1600x1200. If you go into the Australia Cup, which is on at the moment, it's a 1920x1200 ratio. So your ratios are totally different. Now, just to give you an idea of that, and we talk about, oh, we want to film the frame with our subject. Here's straight out of the camera. It's an image that I took. Straight out of the camera. What I then did is I then created another document that was an A4 document. And I imported that image to the A4. As you can see, it's much, much larger than the A4. Now, if I then resized it down to the A4, you can see here, I've lost bits of the image, of the side of the image here. Now, if I had filmed the frame with my subject, I'm now cropping close to the edge of the frame, getting my subject close to, and you think about the judges you had have all probably spoken about this. Oh, it's too close to the edge of the frame. This is one of the reasons why. Okay. So your composition depth. One of the ways we can talk about composition depth is light and shadow. You can see in here, you've got darker apples, you've got some nice bright apples, and the bright bit here is appearing much, much closer to us than the darker apples at the back, and the darker wall at the back is showing us that there's depth there. You can see here, we've got dark underneath the leaves, giving us a sense of depth. Very, very important to create depth. Here's another one. We're using shadow to imply something behind our subjects. Here's another one. You can see the mushrooms, and we start here, we grab here, and we go through the light areas into this and into the basket. But there's a flask at the back. This is there to provide a sense of depth in our still life. Here's another one. We can use blurring, as I spoke before. And you can see here, we're using blurring at the back here to indicate that there's depth behind our subjects. And again here, we've got nice sharp tomatoes here. And as I go further and further back, our image gets more and more blurred, implying a sense of depth. And this is where your aperture comes in very, very important. If you wanted this image, you're going to use a very shallow depth of field. So you might have, say, an aperture of, say, f4 or f3, depending upon how the depth of field you want. Atmosphere. This is something I created in Midjourney. But even in here, you can see we've got fog over this bottle and the fruit down here, where this is much sharper. You look at this skull here is much sharper than this one here. Again, we're creating that sense of depth using fog. Now, of course, in still life, this would not necessarily be a still life because we're pouring the fog out of a glass. But if you created the fog and the fog was coming out of the glass, that would then go into and be classed as a still life. So you can use fog machines to create this mystery and mood and depth within the image. We often talk as photographic judges, oh, this is a busy image. And what the judge really means there is that the image has too many things happening and the photographer has not separated the background from the foreground. Who here has taken rodeo photographs? Few. And I'd like to guarantee the judge said the background is busy. You need to separate the background. Happens in sports photography, rodeo, all the time. We're not separating the background. So you need to consider the background. And in still life, the background is just as important. Here is a series of images. Not taken by me, they were taken by someone else. The lighting, the camera settings have not changed. The only thing that has changed is the background. Nothing else has changed. Look at the difference in those images from the white background to the black background and the grey in between. It is very vitally important that you consider what sort of background you're going to have. And this was the setup for the next series of photographs. You've got just a bit of mat board, tripod, bit of made up base, and here is your images. So here we've got the first setup. There they've added what's called a flag, and I'll show you a flag in a minute. But you can see the difference in the brightness. I'll go back. See the brightness. Okay, there's a different flag, changing the luminosity of the light. Again, a different flag again. And here we're showing you a composite background, what they talked about in the Warragul National. Composites are not allowed. This kind of thing would not be allowed because obviously the background here is a composite. Here is the original image. And that is what was finally created. Okay. Here's the setup for the next series. This was set up in my studio. I'm using one light here. I did use another light over this side. Just a background, a bit of a floor to put the subjects on. Now you see here, and anyone who does their own matting, do not throw, you know, the centre bit that you cut out. Don't throw those away. They're awesome. They make great flags. And all you need is things like these bulldog clips or clamps, and you can stand them up. These ones, a couple of bit of box tops, and what I've done is I've taped aluminium foil on the insides of those to really reflect the light back. So you don't have to spend a lot of money for these sort of things. Now there is a process, and here's the process. There's the subject taken up, and what I've done is I've set the camera up to give me the required depth of field, and for this one I found that f16 was the one that I used to give me a sufficient depth of field for the apples. I then said, okay, let's set the shutter speed. Now you've got room lights, and because I was going to use other lights, I need to have those lights being the only effect. So I found that half a second I needed to get down to ensure that the room lights did not make an effect. I then looked at the backlight. You can see the light in here. I then set up the left-hand light. As you can see, the light's coming from the left up here. And I've set that up. I then set the right-hand light up. You can see the light coming in from there. And then there's your final shot once I'd also, you would then place your flags with the reflection on the front to get the light. But instead of going through each and every one, I've just jumped a few steps and there's your final shot. And you say, oh, but this is horrible. You've got this here and you've got that and this in there. Quite agree. So there's editing and there's your final edit. Okay. And there's your no-tone diagram of that image. And as you can see, that will keep you circulating. You're not going to see anything outside that. It's going to keep you circulating in the centre here. And that's what it was designed to do. You can use a whole swag of different things to do this. But your lighting, your background is all important. And I'll just give you a bit of a warning. Be very, very, very careful of reflective surfaces. If you look at this image, you'll see the camera in the reflective surface and the photographer's wearing a stripy shirt. Okay, so just be very, very, very careful of that. So any questions from tonight? There's a lot that I've covered with. Basically, you should now be able to go home and create your own still life. It takes playing with. Now, there is a handout that will be sent out. I don't know how you're going to whether you're going to send it out or put it on your website or whatever.
We have a closed group.
Yep, that's fine. So that'll be coming down to all of you.
We have email as well.
Yeah. Okay. So however your club wants to put it out, that will be coming around. It's quite an extensive handout, but all you need to do is play with it. Set up something you think, this looks good. Have a look at it through your camera. You don't have to submit the first image that you take. Play with it. Try your different camera settings. Try different lights, different angles. Move the objects around. Move your camera from low to high, to one side, to the other side. Try all the different ways that you can do it. Even try vertically down so you can set up still life on the floor and take it straight down. Your imagination is the limit of what you can do with still life. Any questions?
How do you work out the sweet spot? How do you find sweet
Okay,
spot on-
excellent. Sweet spot is very simple to find out. Print out or get something that's got very fine detail on it, such as a box of, I don't know, cornflakes or something like that. And either stick it to your wall or set up somewhere. Put your camera on a tripod. And then what you do is you focus on your subject. And I would suggest you use manual focus because you don't want the camera trying to refocus. So you set it on manual focus. Even if you used autofocus to focus it, then switch to manual focus. And then start taking images from one end of your aperture range right through to the other end of the aperture range. Bring them all into your editing software and then look at them in sequence, one after the other. And you'll see where the text might be a bit blurred and then it will be getting sharper and sharper and sharper and sharper. And then it will start to get blurred again.
Well, right behind it, you've got a notice.
Yep, that'll do.
That'd be
That's
ideal.
fine. That'd be ideal. You could set, depending upon how long your focal length is, just
No,
set it
what I'm
up.
saying, you can generate that at home, you can have a sheet
Yeah.
with font on it.
Yep, sheet with just fonts on it. That's it. Serial box, something you've printed out on a good printer, and you can then work out your sweet spot. Be aware, if you have a zoom lens, you'll have a sweet spot at two ends of the zoom. And so just be aware of that. Okay. Any other questions? Because I know there's a lot.
What's our definition?
Mm-hmm.
What is our definition?
Yeah, that's
This-
Our definition is actually the one that Gary presented as his definition.
Yeah.
We have the same definition.
Whatever definition, because I'm the judge, I will work with your
No,
definition.
no, but it's what
Yeah.
we've been given.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking you. It's
Yeah,
what
that's
you've
what
given
they're-
us, or is it?
Okay, no,
It's the same. It's an arrangement of inanimate objects in an artificial or natural setting.
So it's content allowed then?
I have no problems with it.
That's-
If
that's-
It's not the
the-
definition.
if
That's
the-
on our website as a definition, so that's what you're following, and that's what Gary
And-
set up as well.
and look, any time I'm judging, I look at what the club gives me and I judge by that. Whether I like the definition or not is irrelevant. I work with that.
So it's the same. So key
That
takeaway
definition.
tonight is read the definition.
Yep.
Read the definition and try to understand that definition.
Yep.
Not always easy, but
And
Yeah.
you don't always agree, but
you don't always agree. And look, as a judge, I don't always agree with it.
yeah.
For instance, you talk about competitions that will have dusk to dawn.
Yes.
Can anyone define for me what dusk is?
You need to say like nautical or something.
No, that's twilight. That's nautical. You've got nautical, civil, and astronomical twilight. Those have definitions, but dusk and dawn do not. So,
It's got to be clear.
yeah, it's something that a lot of people don't think about and consider.
Yep.
Gary, that's great.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
And if you think of any further questions in the future, please either ring me or send an email.
So it's an amazing presentation you gave here.
Thank you.
And I think it actually covers it covers a lot of other things we're trying to do this year as well.
Yeah,
If you look at the composition, we'll be talking about composition so many times in
always.
landscapes, in you name it, portraits and just about every presentation we're going to give this year, the items have been, or the parameters have been covered here as well. Yep.
Just give you one tip.
No.
Photography is not about what you want to include in an image.
Mm.
It is about what you
That's right.
exclude in an image.
That's right.
And a lot of people don't understand that. You've got to try and take as much out of the image as you can, either in editing or within the photography. But that's more important.
Totally agree.